Hi everybody, welcome to my sewing room. I'm Stephanie with Beach Potato Embroidery. Tonight I'm working on a new In the Hoop notebook cover. This is made completely with cork and there's no sewing required. Let's get started. So I stitched out step 1. This is just a placement stitch to show us all the lines of where everything of the notebook's going. You do need an 8x12 hoop to be able to make this design. You'll be fitting a 5x7 notebook inside the notebook cover. So this here is just our placement stitch. These are going to be important later on to line up our backing pieces, but for now we're just going to put our cork on top and we're going to tape this in place. So now that this is taped in place, I do want to show that you want about a 1/2 inch extending past the placement lines on both the top and the bottom and the sides. This gives it to where we'll be able to trim it out later and have enough room on all sides. Alright, we just finished step 2, which is actually just a placement stitch for where we're going to be putting our next piece of fabric. The rest of this is loose. We want it to be that way. We'll stitch this at a later step. Keep it taped in your hoop. For step 3, we're going to use Beach Potato Embroidery's black PU leather. I'm going to place that down and now tape that in place. Now that this is taped in place, I'm going to take it back to the machine to be tacked down. So now that we have this tacked down, we can go ahead and remove the tape. And now we just need to trim as close as possible to the stitch line. Now that the PU leather is trimmed to the stitch line, we can return the hoop to the machine and stitch the placement stitch for the next step. So I stitched out step 4, which is the placement stitch for the wings of our rocket ship. I now have a piece of glitter cut out. This is Beach Potato Embroidery's glitter fabric. I'm going to place this over the placement stitch and I'm going to tape it in place and take it back to the machine to tack it down. Now it's time to trim out the rocket wings. Now that the wings are trimmed out, we're going to take this back to the machine and stitch out the placement stitch for the rocket itself. Now that we stitched out the placement stitch, step 6 is to stitch the tack down for the actual rocket itself. So we're going to place the glitter fabric over that placement stitch and take it back to the machine. The rocket ship has now been tacked down and trimmed to the stitch line. I went on and did the placement stitch for the next step, which are the flames, and we're going to now tack those down. I trimmed the orange glitter to the stitch line, and now we're going to take this back to the machine and stitch the next placement stitch for the next color glitter, which is actually going to be more detail on the rocket ship. One of my favorite things about applique is adding layers to be able to create detail and to really bring that item to life. So I've trimmed the stripes on the rocket and I returned the hoop to the machine and stitched the placement stitch for the window as well as the bottom of the rocket. And we're going to place our next piece of glitter there. I trimmed that to the stitch line and now I'm going to take the hoop back to the machine and stitch the last placement stitch for the last part of the applique on the rocket. Alright, I'm going to lay this over the placement stitch and take this back to the machine. Now that all our applique is done, it's just going to be a matter of changing your thread colors and decorating the rocket as well as covering it with the satin stitches around the raw edges. All the decorative stitching is now done on the rocket. We did our appliques, we did our satin stitches, we did all our decorative fills, and we changed our thread colors a ton of times. And now it is time to flip the hoop over to the back to be able to add the back pieces of cork. So this is the back of our hoop. In our very first step, we stitch the placement lines onto the stabilizer. And so you can see that line running here and that line running here are our registration lines. And we're going to line up our back pieces of cork with those lines. So here's that line. I'm going to take my piece of cork that's already pre-cut to the right size. I'm going to line it up with this line right here, straight along. It's not going to overlap it or extend past it. The rest of it can, but this needs to be straight onto that line, and I'm going to tape it in place. So far, I'm only taping towards the top of the hoop. I'm leaving this little as a flap open. It's just currently in the right place of where it needs to be for the placement stitch. I'm going to do the same thing down here towards the bottom of the hoop. I'm going to tape towards the bottom, leave this open, and then we're going to take our bigger piece of cork and we're going to slide it in between the two. We're going to take our larger piece of cork, we're going to slide it right in between the two pieces. It just needs to be between the two. It's not an exact measurement as to what goes where, as long as these two pieces don't move and they're straight. This just goes in between them. And then we can tape all around. So if you take a quick look here, underneath is our placement stitches. This line is still lining up here with this raw edge. This is tucked underneath, creating a little flap. That's how the notebook is going to be created. And you can also see that it's about a ½ inch overlap on both sides. So we'll be able to trim this out afterwards. I switched my tape to my embroidery paper tape. It was working out a lot better than the masking tape that I had on earlier. Everything's now securely in place. As you can see, I taped all the edges and the sides. I didn't really get tape heavily on the cork because it's going to be stitching around that area. And this is mostly holding. And so we're going to take this back to the machine and really hope it doesn't move or adjust. Slow your machine down to the slowest setting possible so you can stop it if need be, if anything does move on you. So I flipped the hoop back over. I just wanted to show everyone that the work was done on the back side of the hoop this time, adding the pieces of cork, and nothing has changed on the top. Everything's still secure in place on the top, and we're going to be joining the front and the back of the hoop together all in one. The bobbin does match the top thread in this step, so make sure to wind a bobbin that matches your top thread, and you'll be able to continue following along. Alright, it's joining the pieces of the cork on the front and the back side together. I slowed my machine down to the slowest setting as it joins all these layers together. And now I just hope everything stays and doesn't adjust during stitching. So this is the finished project. We will be taking this out of the hoop, but I always double check that my back is all good, that nothing slipped or moved, and trim any extra threads on the back side where it knots off on the ends there. And we're good to go. Everything looks good. And now we can take this out of the hoop. So our final step is trimming this 1/8 of an inch away from the stitch line, or you could do a 1/4 inch, whatever you prefer. So here's our stitch line. We're going to line up our ruler, and this would be 1/4, and here would be 1/8. And you're just going to trim all the way around and cut out your notebook. So our notebook's all trimmed. Here's our cover, and ready for a notebook. Use a normal 5x7 Dollar Tree notebook. This makes great for gifts, and you can insert this right in. So it just goes into that flap. This goes into this flap. And then just push this in place, and that's our spine of our notebook. Here's our actual notebook, and that's the back. This is what it looks like inside. You can find this on beachpotatoembroidery.com.